behind and go into the 1910s, a move towards fashion freedom. And look at this image here. You can see it's a little bit different, isn't it? Let's look at the body ideal of the 1910s. Oh my goodness, what a change! Very petite with sloped shoulders, small breasts, a curved waistline, smooth hips, and a large head. Sort of doll-like. Did anyone really look like this? Well, she did. She's called Gloria Swanson, and she was one of the world's first silent movie stars. And of course, it's when we put the clothing on that we see this symbiotic relationship between the ideal body and the fashion aesthetic. And here it is again. You can see these very petite, sort of compact ladies. And again here. It's very different, isn't it, to that Gibson girl, that tall hourglass figure. This is a tiny little doll-like figure. Let's take a look at the beauty ideal of the 1910s. Now, please note, while most women were not into makeup, they were still going for the natural look with a bit of powder, a little bit of rouge. Trendier women started to embrace makeup and use it to achieve this very weird, exotic look that would grip the edgier side of fashion in the 1910s. Let's take a look at very dark, smudgy eye, dark lips, sort of tousled hair, and an exotic headscarf, like this. And here is this eye makeup look played out in fashion today. And again here. It was in the 1910s that the trendier, more daring women started to cut their hair. This was called an Eton bob. E-A-T-O-N, after the boys' school in England, where boys cut their hair into these bobs like this, although in the 1910s they certainly didn't. They had short back and sides, but this was called an Eton bob. It was thought to be rather boyish and daring. But most women weren't brave enough to cut their hair, so what they did, often in the 1910s, was this. They'd cheat. They'd cut the front of their hair at the sides, short, but keep their hair long in the back. It was a terrifying prospect to cut your hair short. Remember the Gibson girl? The longer your hair was, the more beautiful you were considered. So many women went for this cheat. They would cut it in the front, so facing them it looked like they were very daring and had bobbed hair. But then they would tie it up in the back like this, and often wear a ribbon around their heads. Like this. I'm not sure if she was daring enough to cut all of her hair off or not, but this is the hair ideal of the 1910s. And here is a girl who was brave enough to go for the Eton bob. So cool. Before we look at the dominant fashion idea, you have to understand that, as always, fashion responded to what was happening in the world. And what was happening at this time was that women were starting to want to experience equal rights to men. It was a modern world, wasn't it? Look at this. Women bring all voters into the world. Let women vote. Yes, it was the time of the suffragettes. And here are two of them, votes for women. And here is a suffragette being kicked by a policeman. These women were extremely brave. They were derided by nearly everyone, the suffragettes, including other women. But I think that whenever it's your turn to vote, vote. Look at this woman here being kicked. It's because of women who were brave like her that we have the right to vote. So vote, always. So now we can look at the dominant fashion idea of the 1910s. The world was becoming increasingly modern, and so were women. Hats become smaller, freedom from the corset, high waistline but lower than empire, loose skirts with gathered folds, and generally narrow ankle-length hemlines. A much more practical silhouette, isn't it? But look how much fashion has changed in just 15 years. So fashion begins to catch up. It catches up with clothing that can actually function in a modern world. The idea that less might actually be more begins to inspire those at fashion's cutting edge, yet the mainstream, you will see, still overly embellished to show status. The palette starts shifting from feminine pastels to more exotic hues, and by the end of the decade, we will finally abandon the previous century. Take a look at these images from the 1910s. Note everything. Note the looseness. Note the waistline. Note the skirt length. Note the hems. Look at the smaller hats. Really fits with that kind of petite doll-like body ideal, doesn't it? But wow, you could actually get on a subway wearing this clothing, couldn't you? Well, we had freedom from the corset, but a new fashion constriction kept women in their place still. This. It's called the hobble skirt. Look at how narrow, how incredibly narrow that hem is, although this is a beautiful suit, isn't it? I love this. Why was it called a hobble skirt? Well, there were still a lot of horses around in this era, and this is how you stopped a horse from running away. This is how you parked your horse. You would hobble it. You would put one of these sort of leather belts around its ankles, its hooves. I don't know, I'm not an equestrian, I don't know what the parts of a horse are called, but basically it would stop your horse from running away, and the hobble skirt stopped women from running too quickly into the modern world. Sometimes the hems of these skirts got so tiny that a wire ring was sewn or inserted into the hemline so she wouldn't rip it just by walking naturally. Here are some other examples of hobble skirts. They are utterly ridiculous but rather elegant. The hobble is the latest freak in women's fashion. Freak was the word for craze. Skirts are so tight around the ankle that locomotion is seriously impeded and speed is impossible. See, crazy fashion making headlines way back then. So much so that I think in Central Park there was, for publicity and fun, a hobble skirt race. And they're off at the starting line. And look at this. This is a postcard making fun of the hobble skirt. Look at her. I can't kick. Tragedy, though. Injured in hobble skirt. Mrs. Eve Van Kootsen, while alighting from runabout, falls on pavement. Yes, this afternoon she tripped and fell to the pavement, bruising her hands and face and cutting her lips slightly. Her foot caught on the steps in some manner. As she was wearing a hobble skirt, she was unable to save herself. A fashion victim, if ever there was one. Well, we are still hobbling along. Here are some recent runway that obviously are drawing on the hobble skirt. And take a look at this last image here. This is Marc Jacobs for Vuitton when he did his beautiful collection inspired by the era that we're looking at right now, the 1910s. Look at that silhouette. It's completely what we've been seeing, isn't it? The designer of the decade is somebody you absolutely have to remember and know. This rather distinguished gentleman here. His name was Paul Poiret, and he was French, and he absolutely revolutionized fashion with things like this. This is his famous lampshade dress. Paul Poiret was in love with exoticism. He was in love with color. He is really given credit for liberating women from the corset. but also getting women away from this idea that to look beautiful they had to dress in mauve or lilac or cream. Look at this bright yellow evening coat. And look at this incredibly exotic dress with harem pants. Exotic, colorful, embellished, dramatic. He really put drama into fashion. He took fashion away from all of that prettiness and frou-frou-ness and everything has to have 1,000 artificial roses on it. No, Poiret was pushing women into a new way of looking at fashion. Look at this coat, look at this print. This is a very famous coat by Paul Poiret. It's called La Perse, P-E-R-S-E. This is so incredibly different, isn't it, from what we looked at the beginning of the century. He was very inspired by things like the Russian ballet and the exotic, beautiful costumes in the Russian ballet. He had his own fragrance line, all of them with very exotic packaging. He was about drama. He was about internationalism, looking at places like the East, looking to China, looking to the Middle East, looking to Morocco, looking to Persia for inspiration. He was really a celebrity designer. His muse was his wife, Denise, and there she is, looking very beautiful and exotic in a Paul Poiret. And when you see in that, there she is again, when you see people actually wearing Poiret, you realize just how way out this was for its time. And here are some contemporary homages to Poiret. Look at that. See the harem pants? To see everything about it is Poiret, isn't it? And this too. And look at the coat, La Perse. And then look at this collection by Marc Jacobs. Paul Poiret was important. He still is. And here is a great quote. "I do not impose my will upon fashion. I am merely the first to perceive women's secret desires and to fulfill them." What's he saying there? Fashion's not an island, it's a response. Merci, Monsieur Poiret. Another designer of the decade who is very beloved by fashion and might be beloved by you is this lady. Her name was Madeleine Vionnet, but the world just knows her as Madame Vionnet. And there she is at work. She designed her collections on a little wooden doll. She sort of had to. This is a pattern to one of her dresses. It's extraordinary. How could this be a dress, ever? Well, if you cut it out and then hang it up, it looks like this. She was really the first designer ever to cut fabric on the bias so that it would hang in these wonderful asymmetrical folds. Like this. She was revolutionary. "When a woman smiles, then her dress should smile too," says Madame Vionnet, a beautiful quote from a lovely lady, and her line, her name, was recently relaunched with many of her very beautiful ideas still intact. Isn't that a gorgeous dress? Let's take a look at an icon of the era. This lady here. Her name was Isadora Duncan, and she was an interpretive dancer, freestyle. And there she is. Isadora Duncan was a true original. She was a dancer, and she used textiles and clothing and fashion as part of her dance. Here she is, doing this incredible thing. It's revolutionary. I mean, people were aghast. Extremely beautiful, though, isn't it? And there she is again, in full flight. You really see, don't you, during this era, women really desperately trying to express freedom from constraint in all kinds of ways, and Isadora Duncan certainly did. She once went to a party thrown by Paul Poiret, and at that party there were 300 guests who consumed 900 bottles of champagne. Wow, a little tidbit there for you. Isadora Duncan was a true fashion victim. As you can see, she loved long flowing textiles, and she was famous for wearing long flowing scarves as well. One day, she was driving around with a boyfriend in the south of France, and one of her beautiful long scarves that was dramatically flowing out behind her got entangled in the back wheel and broke her neck. This is how the beautiful Isadora Duncan died, so she was a true fashion victim. But a free spirit. You were wild once, don't let them tame you, said Isadora Duncan. Needless to say, fashion loves her, and here are some fashion editorials obviously inspired by the free-spirited and original Isadora Duncan. I just want to briefly talk about another key designer of the day. Mario Fortuny. He was Italian, and this is what he looked like, a rather handsome, bearded gentleman. Why he's special and why we're talking about him is that he is the first designer to work with pleats. This is his famous dress. It is called the Delphos gown. Delphos sounds a bit Greek, doesn't it? Yes, it's named after the Oracle of Delphi. He loved Grecian drape, and we've already done Grecian drape, haven't we? Many, many weeks ago, and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Basically, he did the Delphos gown throughout his career, from the 1910s all the way through the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, etc. And here are examples of it. Absolutely beautiful, but I want you to see a close-up of how he used fabric. Incredible. So, although inspired by Grecian drape, Fortuny was the first designer of the modern era to embrace draping and pleats. His work would influence Madame Grès in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And there is a Madame Grès. Beautiful gown there. You can see the legacy that Fortuny started, right? But he would also obviously influence Issey Miyake and his Pleats Please line, as well as many others. Anyone who embraces pleats is paying homage to Fortuny.